All right, so hopefully everything we've learned in the last lesson made sense, and you're ready to put your knowledge to the test by completing the first coding challenge today. And what you're going to be building is a grading program. So if you take a look at the day 9.1 grading program Replit coding exercise, you'll see that to begin, I've already created a dictionary with a bunch of student names and their test scores. Now, without changing any of the code above here or below here, I want you to write a program that will be able to convert these scores into a grade. So the grading criteria is over here in the instructions. So if the student scores above 91, then they'll get the grade outstanding. If they score above 81, they get exceeds expectations and then acceptable. And then finally, everybody scoring 70 or lower gets the fail grade. Essentially, what you're going to be doing is creating an empty dictionary from scratch, which is going to be called student grades. And you're going to write some code so that each of the students are represented inside this new dictionary. And instead of having scores as the values in that dictionary, you're going to have the grades that correspond to the scores that they got. So have a read through the instructions and the hints if you need some help. But once you're ready, go ahead and pause the video and give this a go. All right, so to begin, let's first tackle this to-do one. Let's create a new empty dictionary called student grades. And the student grades has to be spelled exactly the same as you see here, because otherwise this print statement will not work. The student grades is going to be an empty dictionary, which, if you remember from the last lesson, we said it looks like this with two curly braces and nothing inside. Now let's move on to to-do number 2. So we're going to write some code below so that we actually add the grades to this student grades dictionary. And we, of course, can get those grades by looking at each of the students' scores. How can we do this? Well, we're probably going to need a for loop because there's lots of items in this dictionary. Let's go ahead and loop through this student scores dictionary. And I'm going to call each of the items the student, because remember, when we have a for loop looping through a dictionary like we are doing here, each of the items that gets picked out is actually the key rather than the whole item. So again, we talked about this in the last lesson, but hopefully this should really make it clear. But even if you didn't know, you could always, of course, just print it, right? So if we go ahead and use the for loop and print it, you can see we get all of the keys from this dictionary when we're looping through it. So for each of the students, we want to get hold of their score. We can calculate the score by getting hold of the value using this key from this dictionary. And to do that, if you remember, is tapping into the dictionary, adding a set of square brackets, and then giving it the key. So in this case, it's going to be each of the student names. And once we've got hold of the score, well, then we can use our if statement to check, well, if the score is greater than 90, so anything above 90, then that means they're going to end up with outstanding. Now, this is the part where we add a new entry to this student grades dictionary. So let's tap into the dictionary, use a set of square brackets again to give it a key. And the key, of course, should still be the student name, which comes from here, which is going to be the same as this. Then we can add a equal sign and followed by the value, which is going to be outstanding. So now we can repeat this process for the rest of these grades. Everybody who scored above 80 but not above 90, so remember that this if statement, once triggered, will skip all of the rest of the elif statements. And then if they scored above 70, they would get acceptable. And finally, for everybody else, which means they scored lower than 70, then they're going to end up with a fail grade. Now, it's really important that if you want the tests to pass, that each of these strings has to match what you see over here exactly. Now that we've done all of this hard work manipulating our dictionary, it's time to actually go ahead and run our code and see what we get. So now our code has converted each of these scores to the corresponding grade. Harry exceeds expectations because his score is between 81 and 90. Ron gets acceptable because it's between 70 and 80, and so on and so forth. Now, did you manage to get it right? Or did you have any problems working with dictionaries? Now, if you go beyond this lesson, I'm going to assume that you're comfortable with editing dictionaries, adding to it, creating new ones. So if you're not yet fully there, then I recommend just going back to the last lesson and just reviewing it once more. Once you've done that, head over to the next lesson and we're going to talk more about nesting in dictionaries and lists. For all of that and more, I'll see you there.